Man ties dog with puppies to a tree and abandons them. But something unbelievable happens. Abandoned by her owner along with her puppy Star, a loyal and courageous dog faces extreme challenges to survive in the forest. On an emotional journey of struggle, overcoming, and love, she finds unexpected allies and discovers the unshakable strength of a united family. An incredible story that will move and inspire you. Bruce was a man known in the region for his dog breeding. He had a reputation for being strict, demanding, and without much patience for anything that didn't meet his expectations. It wasn't difficult to realize that for him dogs were not companions or beings with feelings, but just tools for his business, and it was with that same cold gaze that he looked at Star, his dog, and the puppies she had just given birth to. Star was a strong and loyal dog with eyes that always sought to please her puppies. We are fragile little ones, and yet we depended on breast milk to survive, but for Bruce, those puppies were useless contrary to what he expected. They did not demonstrate the aggression or instinct that he considered valuable in the dogs he raised, and therefore, in his mind, they were nothing more than a burden that morning. Bruce decided he wasn't going to waste any more resources on Star and her little puppies, so he put Star and the puppies in the back of his old pickup truck and drove down a long dirt road surrounded by tall, dense trees. He didn't say a word, and Star innocently continued to look at him with hope without understanding what was coming. When he arrived at an isolated clearing in the middle of the forest, Bruce stopped the car with firm steps. He got out, pulling Star by the collar while the puppies were still disoriented. They stumbled to keep up with him. He didn't look back, and with a quick and secure knot he tied Star to the trunk of a large tree as she watched the silence, still believing he had a good purpose for being there. Then angrily he said aloud, "You are worthless." He said that Star was dry and devoid of any emotion and that he had no use for him. And then, without looking back, he went back to the truck. Star stood still, her eyes full of tears and confusion, still waiting for him to return. She wagged her tail once or twice, believing it was only temporary that her owner would return with water, food, or a new order. But the truck disappeared far away, and the sound of the engine was swallowed by the silence of the forest. Bruce didn't look in the rearview mirror. As for him, it was just a problem solved. As night fell, Star began to understand that something was wrong, as the cold of darkness took over the place and the fragile and hungry puppies began to cry. The forest with its mysterious and threatening sounds seemed more alive than ever, and even though she was scared, she gathered strength to keep the puppies close, using her own body to protect them. She didn't know what was coming, but she felt like she needed to fight, because now only she stood between her little ones and the cruel world that surrounded them. Bruce, on the other hand, drove home with no remorse for him. Star and the puppies were no more. His cold and merciless decision reflected the lack of compassion he carried in his heart. He would never have imagined that that cowardly act would start a story of struggle, of strength and overcoming, that would show that true courage and loyalty are not born from abandonment, but from love and the instinct of protection. As the hours passed, Star began to realize that Bruce would not return, and the noise of the forest that was previously distant and muffled seemed closer, with branches breaking and the whistling of the wind in the distance. Through the trees and other sounds she didn't recognize began to make her heart beat faster, even though she couldn't give up or weaken her. For the puppies needed her, even though they were all hungry and tired. She kept them close by, licking them gently, trying to calm them down. But the hunger started to hurt more, and not only for Star, but also for her puppies. Their fragile little bodies cried softly, seeking the warmth and milk that she no longer had the strength to produce. Star felt despair growing inside her, but she remained firm. She couldn't give in to fear. She needed to resist until the first ray of sunlight appeared. Finally, the sun cut through the darkness of the forest, and Star felt a slight relief. The day seemed to bring a promise of hope, but that feeling didn't last long. As she turned to check on her cubs, she realized something was wrong. 4 of them lay still, her small body unresponsive to Star's gentle touch. She tried to wake up, them licking them gently, but there was no response. Having succumbed to the cold and hunger of the night, Star's heart broke. She felt a pain she had never felt before, as if something inside her was being ripped away. But even in the midst of the pain, Star knew she couldn't get inside. In desperation, she still had live cubs that needed her, even though she was weak, exhausted, and hungry. She struggled to get up, gathered the remaining cubs close to her, and decided that she would fight for them, despite not knowing how. But she would do whatever it took, necessary to protect them. That morning marked the beginning of a fight for survival. Star, who previously only knew the security of a home life, now faced an unfamiliar and cruel world. But within her, something began to change, and her motherly instinct turned into a silent force that kept her moving forward. The morning progressed slowly, and Star fought to keep her cubs protected, even with her weak body and exhausted mind. The sun had already risen, but the heat was not enough to alleviate the cold that seemed to take over her heart since the previous night. As she knew she could not continue like this for long, hungry, thirsty, and without strength as the future, it seemed darker every moment. It was then that Star heard something, and at first it was just the rustling of leaves, but soon the sound became clearer and softer. With cautious steps, she listened to her tense muscles, and the smell that invaded her sense of smell made her heart race, because it was a wild smell unlike anything she had ever smelled, and something inside her knew that that smell represented danger. Among the shadows of the forest appeared first one, then another, and another. It was a pack of wild wolves that began to appear, moving silently. Dark shadows and their eyes shining in the dim light that cut through the trees were large and strong, and their presence made the forest seem even darker. Star instinctively placed herself in front of the puppies, lowering her head and showing her teeth, a clear warning that she was ready to protect the little ones even without having the strength. Then the wolves surrounded Star and her cubs with their cold, calculating eyes assessing the situation. They were so close that Star could hear her controlled breathing. Fear pulsed in her chest, but she couldn't back away. Her weak body trembled, but her motherly instincts forced her to remain firm. It was then that the biggest of them, clearly the leader, stepped forward. He was a scarred wolf that told stories of ancient battles. His golden eyes were intense, and Star felt him studying her differently, almost as if he was trying to understand her situation. The world seemed to stop for a moment as the two stared at each other. Star was prepared for the worst, because if he attacked, she knew she wouldn't stand a chance. But something unexpected happened. The alpha tilted his head slightly as if curious. He took a deep breath, smelling Star and the puppies, and his eyes that seemed threatening before softened for a brief moment. Then he made a low sound, almost like a short growl, but it didn't carry aggression, that is, it was an order for the other wolves, who until then were tense and ready to act, to start backing away. Star was still in disbelief at what was happening. The alpha took another long look at her and her cubs before transforming and disappearing into the trees, and one by one, the other wolves continued moving with the same deadly expression with which they arrived. Within seconds, they completely disappeared as if they had never been there. And Star was still shaking, but this time it was with relief, as she could hardly believe what had happened, and for some reason the wolves decided to spare her. Maybe it was the smell of her kits or the protective look she gave them, but the danger had passed, at least for now. Star sighed deeply, releasing a sigh she hadn't had until she realized she was holding her kits. Her little cubs, oblivious to the danger they had faced, began to move and whine for their mother Star. She licked them gently, trying to calm them down while feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion, because she knew that this encounter had been a warning that the forest was dangerous and new challenges could arise at every moment. But by some miracle, she and her little ones were spared. The sun was already setting again, and Star felt her hunger tighten, and her puppies, still so small and fragile, whimpered softly, pressing themselves against her in search of warmth and comfort. Star knew that if she stayed stuck there in that tree, none of them would survive for long, and something inside her began to change when she realized that waiting was no longer an option, and that no one would come to help them. And if she wanted to save her cubs, she would have to fight. Star began to move, testing the limits of the collar that held her, but the leather was thick and resistant. However, her teeth, despite the fatigue, were still strong, and with determination she began to chew, and each bite was an effort. Each pull felt like stealing the little energy she had left. But Star didn't stop. She was thinking about her puppies, their dependent bodies, and that image gave her the strength to continue. Time seemed to drag on, but finally, with one last effort, the leather gave way. The collar broke and Star was free. She staggered for a moment, surprised that she could move again. But there was no time to rest. Her kits needed food, and she needed to find something to feed them. It was then that, with her senses alert, Star began to explore the forest, and at first everything seemed impossible because Star never needed to hunt. Before, she was a dog raised by humans and was used to receiving ready-made food without effort. But now she felt something different. Her previously dormant instincts began to awaken, and the smell of the air, the sounds of the forest, even the movement of leaves on the ground seemed more brighter living. Star knew that she would need to rely on these senses to survive, and her first hunting attempts were clumsy. Star tried to chase a squirrel that was faster than her. Then she tried to get close to a mouse, but it escaped before she could act, and each failure made the hunger hurt even more. But Star didn't give up. She kept trying to move more carefully, observing every sound and every movement around her. And finally, after hours of effort, Star was successful. She found a young rabbit distracted while feeding, and this time Star moved patiently, crawling across the floor and approaching silently. And when she was close enough, she jumped with all her might, and very quickly she had her teeth clenched on the rabbit, and for the first time Star caught her prey. The raw meat was unlike anything she had ever eaten, but at that moment it didn't matter because it was food they needed. After eating enough to regain some energy, Star returned to her cubs, and the rest they cuddled around her, nursing harder now that her body had the energy to produce milk again. But there was still more work to do, and Star knew I needed to find water. Her keen sense of smell guided her through the forest, following a faint smell of moisture to a crystal-clear stream, and it was there that she hydrated, feeling the coolness of the water that revitalized her tired body as she returned to the place where her cubs were resting. Star noticed something in the forest that before seemed scary, because now she was starting to feel at home. Yes, it was Star's strength and determination that had transformed, and she was no longer just an abandoned dog. Now she was a fighter, and above all a protector, and above all a survivor. But life in the forest was still full of surprises, and during the morning, while walking in search of water to quench her puppy's thirst, Star smelled a different smell in the air. Something strong, a smell that she didn't yet know well, but that made the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she followed the trail, moving cautiously slowly until she found on the cold ground a wolf lying motionless, clearly lifeless, and next to her 3 wolf cubs that were whimpering with their eyes still closed, unable to understand what was happening. Had happened. The wolf seemed to have fought to the end to protect them, but now she was there, unable to take care of her little ones. Star stood still and watched the scene. She felt a wave of sadness and empathy when she saw that something inside her knew exactly what those wolf cubs were facing: abandonment and the fight for survival, and she licked them gently as she did with her own cubs. She reassured them and welcomed them as part of her family. The following days were of adaptation, and the wolf cubs and Star's cubs learned to live together despite their differences. They quickly bonded together, forming a unique brood, and Star in turn divided her attention equally between them all. She fed them, protected them, and guided them through the forest. It was a challenge greater than any she had faced, but Star seemed to meet strength. Now she saw hope. She knew that raising them in that environment would be difficult, but she also knew that they were getting stronger every day. As she watched the puppies playing together, Star realized that her mission had become even greater. It didn't matter if they were wolves or dogs to her, they were all hers. They needed her, and she would fight for them all. Star understood that her strength didn't just come from the puppies for the challenges of life in the forest, because despite protecting them with all her strength, she knew that they would need to learn to take care of themselves. So day after day, she began to train them. And the first lesson was to teach how to recognize dangers. Star took the puppies for short walks around the cave, always on alert, and when she heard the sound of a twig breaking or a strange movement in the shadows, she immediately showed her puppies how to identify easily. But Star's puppies weren't far behind. They made up for her lacking instinct with the determination to please her mother. One of the most important lessons Star taught was teamwork. She made them work together, sharing tasks, where some distracted their prey, while others positioned themselves to attack with each success. Star showed her pride by licking them or wagging her tail, making it clear that they were on the right path. But it wasn't just survival that brought them all together, but she also fell asleep sharing warmth and security when the cold forest wind howled outside, and Star, he felt a silent satisfaction at having transformed that wild environment into a refuge for his family. Over time, the wolves began to venture out alone for short periods, and they returned with exciting stories, bringing small trophies like birds or feathers. And Star knew this was the next step toward their independence, but she still watched them closely, ready to intervene if anything got out of hand. It was then when Star made every muscle in her body tense, because one day it wasn't just the smell of another animal, it was the smell of danger, and her heart skipped a beat. She immediately turned around, running back to the cave, and along the way, the sounds of breaking branches and quick, muffled footsteps began. Star knew what this meant. A strange pack had invaded the area, and they were wolves, but different from the ones she had encountered before. These were fierce and without curiosity or hesitation. They were there to hunt. When Star arrived at the cave, chaos had already occurred. Awakened wild instincts and unusual courage stood by Star's side, causing her to defy the invading wolves along with her wolf children and canine brothers, inspired by her bravery, also began to move, emitting small growls and barks. It was an unlikely scene where wolf cubs and dogs united as a family faced a much greater enemy. The invaders attacked, and the fight was fierce, against which Star and her cubs fought everything they had. But the wolves were bigger, more experienced, and in greater numbers. With each blow, Star felt that they were fast, but the invading wolves, they were taken by surprise. Their wolf pup wasted no time. He led the attack with precision and strength, his pack following closely. In just a few moments, the tide of battle turned. The invading wolves realized they were at a disadvantage and began to retreat. Their leader let out a short howl, calling his people to retreat, and one by one they disappeared into the forest as silence finally returned. Star fell to her knees and saw that her family, however unlikely, was stronger than any obstacle. Star knew they would still face many challenges, but together they were prepared for anything on the battlefield. The invading wolves that seemed so threatening and unbeatable disappeared into the forest, defeated and humiliated. With the arrival of the Alpha and his pack changed everything. Star raised her head, still very tired but without showing fear, because she knew that that wolf had the power to destroy her family. But he had chosen otherwise when he pressed his nose against hers. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. It was a gesture perhaps even of admiration, where the Alpha was the last to leave. But before disappearing between the trees, he gave Star one last look as if to say, "If you need us, we will be here." When everything returned to silence, Star felt a mixture of relief and pride that her family had survived something that seemed impossible. Her puppies, both dogs and wolves, were learning to be more than survivors. They were learning to be a team, a real family. The battle was over, but the journey continued with her puppies around her with renewed determination in her heart. Star knew that no matter what happened, they would be ready to face it together, and somewhere in that wild expanse she knew she had allies who respected her, as much as she respected them. Despite the dangers, now something was different about Star and her puppies, as if they were a unique mix of dogs and wolves that she taught them to hunt, fight, and hide when necessary, and above all to work as a team. The cave that was once a simple shelter now made them feel at home. The cubs cuddled around Star, warming each other as the sounds of the forest echoed outside. It was a peaceful time, but Star knew she needed to remain vigilant. The forest never rested, and new dangers could arise at any moment. But there was something that gave Star greater security than her alliance with the pack ever had. Against all odds, they had not only survived but were thriving with every step. Every day was proof that their union was stronger than any challenge. And Star lifted her head, the cold wind passing across her face bringing with it the familiar smell of the forest. She knew that the journey was far from over, and that there would be new challenges, new struggles, maybe even losses. But none of that made her fear, and her strength came not only from her maternal instinct, but from the resilience that her only family had built on her. Forrest kept calling them to challenges and adventures, but how would they face it together, being ready for whatever came, because in the end their strength was not just in their bodies but in the unbreakable bond they had with each other, and they were a family, a unique and resilient family, ready to flourish even in the most difficult terrains. And so ends the incredible journey of Star and her unique family, a story of courage, resilience, and love that shows us how we should be. Just like Star, who faced abandonment and the challenges of the forest with courage and determination, we all go through difficult times in life. Whether at work, in relationships, or in our dreams, overcoming requires strength, resilience, and the support of those who are by our side. This story teaches us that, with love and perseverance, we can overcome even the biggest obstacles and build something extraordinary. If this message touched you, don't forget to like, share the video with those who need inspiration, and subscribe to the channel to follow more incredible stories like this. Let's create a community of courage and hope together.